Hello everyone, this is Tom Fox, and I'd like to welcome you to episode 403 of the FCPA Compliance Report. Today's podcast is sponsored by Convercent. While it may seem a bit early, I would like to ask you to consider attending Converge19. We just finished up Converge18, where I spoke, and today I'm going to visit with Eric Feldman, who also spoke at Converge18. We're going to talk about some of our highlights from the conference. I think you will find it a fascinating exploration of really cutting-edge compliance and ethics topics. The FCPA Compliance Report is a part of the Compliance Podcast Network. Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox, and I'm back for another episode. I'm privileged to be with Eric Feldman. Eric is Senior Vice President for Affiliated Monitors, and we are both at Day 2 of Converge18. Welcome, Eric.
Thank you, Tom. Appreciate you having me.
Eric, you and I both attend a lot of conferences, and this one has a very unique and distinct flavor. And so I thought maybe we could visit about both of our reflections from day one, because I heard some pretty interesting remarks, I heard some very powerful remarks, and I heard some thought-provoking remarks that I'm going to take back to Houston and mull around. But I wanted to ask, what were some of the highlights for you from day one of Converge18?
Well, yeah, this has been a very interesting conference so far. Unlike some of the larger conferences, that have a dozen or more tracks, this is very well focused on the action piece of what it is we're supposed to be doing, what compliance officers are supposed to be doing. And it kicked off with the CEO and co-founder, Patrick Quinlan, talking about organizational justice. And I found that to be fascinating. You don't hear that at compliance conferences very often. And he even remarked that. And he believes, and I agree with him, that organizational justice is kind of a foundational concept for having employees that believe you, that find credibility with the message that you're giving as a leader, and it is the underpinning of having a strong ethical culture, which that's something that I'm very big on. And without that sense of justice, everything else you do kind of falls apart. So I really like that thought process. The other thing that Patrick said at the beginning, which I thought was terrific, was he urged compliance officers, don't protect the brand.
Right.
Move the brand forward. And that is a great message. And it's a hard message for some compliance officers to hear, especially those that perhaps had been promoted through the organization and see themselves as executives of their company first, compliance officers second. And it really is a concept that, as a former federal IG, I understand greatly, which is you have a job to do. You have an independent job to do. And yes, you're there to help move the organization forward, but you're not there to make excuses for the organization or to look the other way when things go wrong or to protect the company's reputation. You doing your job in ensuring ethical conduct and the right principles among your staff and alignment of core values, that is what is really necessary in order to protect the organization, not just protecting the brand.
That's an interesting interpretation, because I heard the same thing, and I immediately thought, oh, that's the difference in law and compliance. So coming from a legal perspective, sitting in the general counsel's chair, my job was to absolutely protect the organization. And moving over to compliance, it became something different. Prevent, detect, and remediate. And now what we heard yesterday was using reputation actually proactively in ways that you're absolutely right that compliance officers have not thought through. So I thought those were very interesting remarks. The panel that, the three things that kind of I articulated, the thought-provoking, the very tactical, and the most interesting, for me the most interesting was the CEO panel.
Yes.
And it was interesting because, and unfortunately, it just started at the end, but we started to get some real controversy in very CEO speak, very measured, very calm. Nevertheless, it was clear we had a fairly good divide, but we ran out of time. But the other thing that struck me is that in Patrick's talk, he used the example of a CEO of Delta Airlines who, after the shooting in Parkland, high school removed the NRA from the partnership of Delta. He did that on his own initiative without consulting the board. And in the board panel, they talked about what they would have done in that situation. And it made me, and each CEO had a different response. And it made me realize there really is no right or wrong. It is your organization, your relationship with the board, how the board views you, how you view the board, and driving home the message that you and I talk about a lot, which is you have to measure, evaluate, and manage your risk. And you have to measure and evaluate and manage your relationship. And so I found that part really instructive for me.
That's so true. And, the CEO panel really was a source of a lot of conversation afterward among the participants about, what is right and what is wrong. And clearly there is no right or wrong answer. But one of the things that I thought Patrick had said earlier in the day was talking about courage and using the Delta CEO as an example of courage to do what he thought was the right thing in line with the organizational core values.
Right.
And that courage, that word I find very interesting, because the opposite point of view of the other CEO that felt that would have kind of gone beyond what he would have done has to do with managing risk and the fact that in this polarized country of ours, that he could lose a lot of customers if you make the wrong decision on a social issue. The other point of view on that, from the standpoint of the Delta CEO, would be, well, I was aware of that, I understood the risks, but our values are more important to us than losing a few customers.
Right.
So it's a very interesting discussion and calculation that you have to go through as an organization. I also took away, and this came as a topic of discussion in my session on perverse incentives, alignment of core values with action within the company is critical. Now, there are some social justice issues I would think are might be just absolutely critical to core values of a company. Someone brought out in the CEO panel immigration issues. And I heard another conversation later in the day, I think it was in Wei Chen's session, where she talked about a company that had to deal with their own employees potentially being deported. And at what point do you say as a company, we're going to protect these folks at whatever risk it is, and we're not going to cooperate with the immigration officials if we think the policy is wrong, and our core values are people first. So it's a very interesting dynamic, and one that I think we'll be talking about for some time.
On the very tactical level, we had a presentation by, I hope I don't butcher her name, Sharon either Gehart or Gehart or something close to that.
Unilever.
From Unilever.
Yeah.
And she focused on the challenges of not only communicating values to a workforce of nearly 200,000 people, but also tactically, how do you encourage a speak-up culture in places like tea plantations in Africa? And some of the tactics and methods and strategies they used were extremely innovative, but it made me realize that for some types of industries, you have to go far beyond what you and I would think about here in the United States. I mean, they had pieces of pads and pencils in certain locations where people could go to speak up and raise their hand.
Right, the old suggestion box.
Right.
Yes. Well, what it shows you, and I saw this so clearly in her presentation, is that when you're dealing with a multicultural organization, a highly geographically diverse population, you can't use a cookie-cutter approach when you're looking at an ethics and compliance program. And I've seen it all too often where government agencies, some, and it's changing a little bit, but government agencies and regulators and some consultants will look at the gold standard, like a Lockheed Martin style program with all the bells and whistles, and try to impose that and superimpose it on top of any kind of company anywhere, regardless of size or culture, and it doesn't work. And the paper and pencils are going to work better in some locations than, having a complex hotline email system when people don't have access to email. You have to think about some of these things. Also heard conversations about from Sharon at Unilever about some of her employees. They're using an app. And millennials like apps, and that's how they communicate. And almost everyone has a mobile phone. And so they're more likely to report if they have the phone in their pocket. They can press the app, and they can kind of let loose on something bad that happened that day that made them uncomfortable.
Another thing that struck me was in Rwanda, they wanted to communicate corporate values, and they distilled it down to 10 points in a PowerPoint or other visual presentation, but it was either cartoons or graphics. And she said that their original graphics, it turned out, was either insulting or somehow inappropriate for the audience. And so she put up the graphics that they used. And frankly, when I saw those graphics, I thought it was a very bad caricature of what some Americans think of Africans. But it turns out that's what Rwandans expected to see, and made me once again realize, not that I'm culturally insensitive, but I don't know. And
Right.
You really have to get a local knowledge source, even down to the graphics you use.
Well, and that's right. I mean, culturally knowledgeable and aware people on site can be critical resources to tell you what's going to work and what isn't. It's very hard to sit in a corporate office in the United States and assert that you're going to roll out this ethics and compliance program and this is the way we're doing it, without really understanding who is on the receiving end. And it gets back to Patrick's comment, one of the comments he made, and I keep quoting Patrick, and I find, just as an aside, it fascinating that Patrick is not a compliance professional, that his background is software and tech.
Right.
And how he has absorbed all this, I find very insightful. But he talked about the individual and the fact that compliance focuses too much on process and procedure and less on the individual. And I think we could be a lot more effective if we look at who is on the receiving end of our messages and our training and our reporting capabilities, and what are they likely to use? What are they, and does it resonate with them? And how do you know if your program's effective? And that's where the really good programs like Unilever really know what's happening in the field. Unfortunately, you're going to get a lot of frequent flyer miles.
Due to the intemperateness of Convercent, they managed to schedule our presentations at the same time. So I was not able to attend yours. But I was wondering if you might be able to educate me, but also give, from your perspective, what were some of the highlights of your topic on perverse incentives?
Sure. It was a very fun topic. And it really was looking at the unintended consequences of overzealous performance objectives on ethical behavior and on the lack of alignment between performance management systems and your core values as a company, including ethics and integrity. So what I mean by that is, I would say most of the companies that we have monitored or assessed There is rarely a alignment between what they say, about what they're trying to achieve in ethics and compliance, and performance objectives. You look at performance appraisals for employees at all levels, it's all about financial performance or technical performance. You look at the performance objectives and the bonus determinations for managers at multiple levels of the organization, and it's all about financial targets. There's nothing in there about encouraging ethical behavior, nothing about the hows. Promotion criteria, same thing. It's all financial criteria. And the main point that I was trying to make is that what gets measured gets done.
Right.
And if you don't measure it, it's not going to get done. And I used some examples from our monitoring. One kind of stands out to me where the code of conduct brilliantly laid out that we rely on our first line managers to communicate the ethics message and translate that into day-to-day business decision-making. And it was another point made in the conference earlier in the day about integrating ethics and business, and that business integration piece that is sometimes missing. Well, I thought that was brilliant, and I had my first focus group with a group of first-line supervisors at this company, and I thought I would ask them, how do you do this? I'm very interested in what kinds of techniques you use to communicate to the staff and to integrate this into the day-to-day business. And the answer was, what, are you kidding? We don't do that. If this company wanted us to do that, it would be in our performance appraisals.
Right.
And my bonus is based on how many contracts I sell. It is not based on anything else. So why would I bother wasting my time cultivating this culture and spending time talking to the staff about things that aren't aligned with what my bonus is all about? That was very instructive to me and really left an impression on me about why things don't work. So we talked at length in the class about the need to put in those kinds of incentives. We also talked about Wells Fargo as an example of a company that had unintended consequences of pushing to the point of maximum stress their customer relationship managers to sell products and cross-sell products. And while cross-selling products is not in and of itself a bad thing, it's
right.
a common practice, it's how they did it. And they didn't balance it with, look, we want you to sell, but it's got to be in a way that preserves our reputation as an honorable company with high integrity. So we're going to do this the right way, and we're not going to sell products to people that don't need them. Never mind making up people that don't exist, which is really what happened with Wells Fargo. And I had a few Wells Fargo folks in the class, which when I asked, is there anyone here from Wells Fargo, they were sitting up front with their arms crossed. And it was a challenge, but we got through it. And they were compliance people, and they did agree with the argument. And that's what they're trying to change. And that was really the good news part of the story.
I think you mentioned you sat in on Wei Chen's talk, and I did as well. And she, I thought, gave me some very thought-provoking areas to consider. I've heard her speak several times, and part of her talks is it's really not tactical, it's really not even strategic, it's asking people to think. And I find that very useful, certainly to get me to think about different issues. And she is right up front that a lot of the questions she posed, she did not have the answers to. She is asking us as a community to perhaps come up with some answers. But in her role as, or the role she's chosen for herself post-DOJ, of being provocative, asking us to consider ethics, asking us to consider values, it's a long-winded way of this is really what I wanted to pose to you. You just described how you held a meeting with certain middle managers in a company that you were working with. So part of the work that you do for affiliated monitors is truly very tactical. You ask some very specific questions. But part of your work at affiliated monitors is also working with the Department of Justice in the role as a corporate monitor. So it occurs to me that you have to see both a very tactical issue and approach, but also a much bigger strategic approach. And to really be able to communicate to the Department of Justice and the companies that you're monitoring that you have turned the corner on integrating values into the business. And that's the conversation I hear her saying at some of these conferences. And I was just wondering what your thoughts were.
Well, that's very perceptive. I think it is a very delicate balance of tactical and strategic thought when you go into a company to assess an ethics program, a compliance program. On the one hand, Hui talked a lot about measurements and that you have to sit down and think about what is the measurement that you are achieving what you want to be achieving. And the very clear example she used, which I think is one everyone can understand, is training. So you go into a company and you look at training, you can look at the numbers. 99% of the people were trained. Everybody has complied. That used to be enough for DOJ. And it used to be enough for government agencies just to check that box that everybody got training. But the real answer, the outcome versus the output, as she put it, is what did they learn? Was it effective? And the only people that can really tell you if the training was effective or not are the recipients of the training. And too few companies go down to that level, which appears to be tactical, to ask those questions to be able to find out if the training was effective. Did that message really get through, or are people cynical about the message that's coming and it's not seeping through the brain and therefore it's not going to impact their behavior? The other kind of strategic thing that we have to think about is what is material for the company. You can go in and find 1,000 things wrong with an ethics program and have a roadmap that takes you from New York to California. But what really matters is where the company was as an organization, what they put into place, and whether it's sufficient enough, given the nature of their business, to prevent a recurrence of what happened that got them into whatever kind of agreement that they're on right now. If you strive for perfection in an ethics and compliance program, you're never going to win. And if you have nefarious goals and you want to demonstrate that a company is not doing what it should be doing, it's easy. You could always find that. But you have to exercise some judgment about, is this good for the company? Have they come as far as we want them to come? And given their culture, do they have a program that makes sense for them?
So, Eric, unfortunately, we're near the end of our time, but I think we have both enjoyed Converge18, and I hope we can join each other again next year for Converge19.
I would love that. Thanks, Tom.
Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox again. I'd like to thank you again for listening to this episode. I hope you will join me again next week when I have another guest. If you have any questions of Eric, you can reach him at Feldman at affiliatedmonitors.com. You can always email me at tfox@tfoxlaw.com. Once again, thank you for listening, and I hope you'll join me again for another episode. This episode has been a part of the Compliance Podcast Network.